Some deaths seem to have clear answers at first, but as the evidence comes together, the story shifts into something far more unsettling. Lies are exposed, secrets surface, and what seemed simple turns into something almost unbelievable. In this video, we'll explore 5 real cases of disturbing deaths that were solved with shocking and unexpected twists. Stories that prove the truth can be stranger than anything imagined. It was May 2, 2001 in Chevy Chase, Maryland. 50-year-old Leslie Preer, who worked in advertising production, didn't show up for her job. She was always punctual, so when she missed an entire morning without calling, her coworkers grew concerned. One of them called her husband Carl Preer. Carl had last seen Leslie at around 7:45 that morning, and everything seemed fine. But the call worried him, so he and the coworker drove to the house. When they walked inside, they were met with a disturbing sight. Blood was visible in the foyer. Carl searched frantically, calling out for his wife. Upstairs, they found her body. She had clear signs of trauma, and there was evidence of a violent struggle. Yet there was no forced entry. The neighborhood was quiet and rarely saw crime. Police had never even been called to the Preer house before. The scene was brutal. Blood was found throughout the home, especially in the upstairs bedroom. The autopsy later showed Leslie had died from blunt force injuries during the struggle. Under her fingernails, investigators found DNA. She had fought back. But in 2001, there were no matches in the database. The case quickly went cold. At that time, Leslie's teenage daughter, Lauren, was dating a man named Eugene Gligor. He was 21, only a few years older, and someone the family trusted. Their relationship had started when Lauren was 15, and both families were close. Nobody suspected him. After Leslie's funeral, the case faded from public view. Police held on to the evidence, but without leads, it sat unsolved. Lauren spent the next 20 years not knowing who had been responsible. In 2022, Montgomery County Police began reopening cold cases using forensic genealogy. Instead of looking only for direct DNA matches, this method used partial matches from genealogy databases, tracing distant relatives and building family trees. Detectives submitted DNA from the 2001 crime scene. The results came back with a distant match in Romania. From there, investigators traced the family tree until one name stood out: Eugene Gligor. It shocked investigators. He wasn't just a name. He had been inside the Preer home, had dated Lauren, and had known Leslie well. Even worse, his DNA wasn't found in just one place. It was throughout the house, including under Leslie's fingernails. She had scratched him during the fight, leaving behind undeniable evidence. To be certain, investigators followed him discreetly. At an airport screening, he was given a water bottle. Once discarded, it was tested. The DNA matched. On June 18, 2024, the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force arrested Gligor in Washington, D.C. He was 44, living quietly and working in real estate. His coworkers described him as calm and positive. Nobody believed he could have been involved. For Lauren, the news was crushing. She told Fox 5 that she had run into Gligor just a year earlier at a restaurant. They had spoken casually. Nothing about him seemed unusual. Learning he had been the one responsible left her stunned. There was never a clear motive. Police said Gligor had been a troubled teen, but nothing connected him directly to such violence. To this day, no explanation has been given. What made the betrayal worse was the lack of forced entry. Leslie likely let him in willingly, not realizing the danger. The case became historic for Maryland. It was the first solved through forensic genealogy in the state. Investigators said the work was long and difficult, but it brought resolution after 23 years. Gligor was charged with first-degree murder, later reduced to second-degree. He pleaded guilty in 2025. His sentencing is scheduled for August 28th, with a maximum penalty of 30 years. For the Preer family, justice had finally come. But the man responsible had been in plain sight for decades, once welcomed into their home, later seen as a trusted face. Nobody imagined he was the one who had taken everything from them. It was October 16, 1955, in Chicago, Illinois. 14-year-old Robert Peterson and his 2 friends, 13-year-old John Schussler and his younger brother, 11-year-old Anton, had a simple plan that Sunday. They were going downtown to see a Disney documentary called The African Lion at the Loop Theater on North State Street. The boys were close friends, well known in their neighborhood. John hoped to become a priest. Anton dreamed of being a veterinarian. And Robert loved bowling. They left home from Jefferson Park in the afternoon, planning to return before evening. but they never came back. When night came, their parents grew worried. Robert's father, Malcolm, went to the Gale Street police station to report them missing. A young detective, James Jack, had just finished his shift but stayed to help search. Alongside his partner, he combed the rainy streets of Chicago, but the boys were nowhere to be found. By the next day, the families retraced the boys' steps. They learned the boys had made it to the theater, and later to the Monte Cristo bowling alley on West Montrose Avenue, about 8 miles from downtown. After that, the trail ended. 2 days later, on October 18th, a man walking near Robinson Woods Forest Preserve spotted what looked like a body in a ditch. He called the police. What they found shocked the city. The bodies of Robert, John, and Anton were stacked in a shallow ditch. They had been stripped, gagged, tied, and strangled. Robert's body also showed 14 deep cuts to his head. No clothes or clear evidence was found. The scene was not secured, and reporters and officers trampled through it, destroying potential clues. Forensics in 1955 were limited, so investigators had little to work with. The case quickly became a heater case, a high-profile investigation under intense pressure. But despite tips such as screams heard at the nearby Idle Hour stables and tire tracks at the scene, the leads weren't properly followed. Months later, in May 1956, the stables burned down in what many suspected was arson meant to destroy evidence. The case then went cold. The tragedy also took a toll on the families. Just a month after losing his sons, Anton Sr. died of a heart attack. Detective Jack never forgot the case. Even as he grew older, he visited the boys' graves each year and later wrote a book, 3 Boys Missing. It wasn't until the 1990s that a new movement came. In 1994, federal agents investigating the disappearance of wealthy candy heiress Helen Bruck began hearing the name Kenneth Hansen. Multiple people claimed Hansen had admitted to killing the 3 boys back in the 1950s. One informant recalled him warning that anyone who crossed him would end up like the Peterson boy. Hansen had worked at Idle Hour stables in 1955 and lived near where the boys were last seen. He also had a past arson arrest in 1970, which helped agents obtain a warrant. In July 1994, Hansen was arrested and charged. Investigators believed he lured the boys while they were hitchhiking, promising to show them horses. At the stables, he tried to harm the younger 2, but Robert interrupted, leading to the violent cuts found on his body. Police believed Hansen then strangled all 3. Physical evidence suggested they had been inside a barn, with hay in their lungs and bindings consistent with stable ropes. Marks also matched the floor mats of a Packard station wagon, a car linked to Hansen and his associate, Silas Jane. Jane, a powerful figure in the horse world, allegedly ordered the barn fire to protect his reputation, not Hansen. In 1995, 40 years later, Hansen went on trial. Testimonies from people who said he had confessed over the years convinced the jury. He was sentenced to 200 to 300 years in prison. His conviction was overturned in 2000, but in a second trial in 2002, he was found guilty again and given life in prison. Hansen died in 2007 at age 74, never admitting guilt. For Detective Jack, who had carried the case his whole career, it brought some closure. But for the families, the pain of losing 3 young boys never faded. It was April 16, 1960, in McAllen, Texas. Irene Garza, a 25-year-old second-grade teacher, left her parents' home that Saturday evening. She was headed to Sacred Heart Catholic Church for confession. It was the night before Easter. Irene was admired in her community. She had been Miss All South Texas Sweetheart in 1958 and a homecoming queen at Pan American College. But more than her beauty, people knew her for her faith and her kindness. She worked with poor children in McAllen and was active in the Legion of Mary. That night, Irene never came home. At first, her parents thought she had stayed for the Easter Vigil, but by 3 a.m., with no sign of her, they reported her missing. What followed was the largest volunteer search ever seen in the Rio Grande Valley. Days later, her purse, shoe, and lace veil were found along a road. On April 21st, her body was discovered in a canal several miles away. The autopsy revealed she had been beaten, suffocated, and harmed while unconscious. Bruises marked her face, but the water had washed away most evidence. Near her body, investigators found a slide viewer with a black cord. It belonged to one man, Father John Bernard Fite. Fite was a 27-year-old visiting priest at Sacred Heart, the very church where Irene had gone that night. He was the last person known to have seen her alive. Parishioners later recalled strange things. Fite's confession line moved slowly, and he left the sanctuary several times. Other priests saw scratches on his hands after Easter Mass. Fite claimed he broke his glasses and cut himself climbing through a window. He even failed a polygraph, though results were reported as inconclusive. Behind the scenes, church officials urged police to leave him alone. In the 1960s, accusing a priest was almost unthinkable. The case went cold. Just weeks earlier, another woman, Maria America Guerra, had been attacked at a different church. Fite admitted being present but denied involvement. He was charged, but the trial ended with no decision. To avoid another, he pled no contest to aggravated assault and paid a $500 fine. After this, Fite was sent to a monastery in Missouri. A monk named Dale Taccini was told Fite had killed someone and needed counseling. Over time, Fite admitted to harming one woman and ending the life of another. Taccini stayed silent, believing it was not his place to tell authorities. Fite later moved to Jemez Springs, a treatment center for priests in New Mexico. He became a staff member, approving others for assignments, even priests who later harmed children. By the 1970s, Fite left the priesthood, married, moved to Phoenix, and lived quietly, volunteering for 17 years at a food charity. In 2002, more than 40 years later, Taccini finally came forward. Around the same time, another priest, Joseph O'Brien, admitted that Fite had confessed to ending Irene's life. Still, in 2004, a grand jury refused to indict after key witnesses weren't called. Irene's family refused to let the case die. Her relative, Nomi Sigler, pushed for answers for decades. In 2014, Ricardo Rodriguez ran for district attorney, promising to reopen the case. He won, and in 2015, the investigation resumed. In 2016, Fite was arrested in Arizona at age 83. Despite his poor health, his bond was set at $1 million. He pleaded not guilty, and the case dragged on. Finally, in November 2017, the trial began. Prosecutors laid out the evidence: the items near Irene's body, Fite's stories, the scratches, the failed polygraph, and his own confessions. They asked for 57 years, one for each year he had lived free. On December 7, 2017, Fite was found guilty. The next day, he was sentenced to life in prison. He died in 2020 at age 87. Nearly 60 years later, Irene Garza's family finally saw justice. The young teacher, beauty queen, and daughter who never came home was remembered, and the truth could no longer be buried. It was January 15, 1980, in Gresham, Oregon. 19-year-old Barbara Mae Tucker, a business major at Mount Hood Community College, was on her way to her evening class. Barbara was described as bright, kind, and full of energy. That night, however, she never made it to class. The next morning, students heading to campus found her body near a wooded area by a parking lot between Kane Road and the school. She was partially undressed, the weather was cold, and her injuries showed signs of a violent attack. The medical examiner later confirmed she had been attacked and beaten to death. From that moment, investigators treated the case as a homicide. Witnesses recalled strange events from that night. One person saw a woman with a bloody face running from the bushes, waving her arms for help. Another heard screams. Someone else reported seeing two figures moving in the distance, while another spotted a man hiding near the parking lot. The evidence suggested Barbara had tried to fight back and escape, but no one reached her in time. Detectives searched for answers, but the case went cold. Physical evidence had been collected, including swabs from the autopsy, but in 1980, DNA technology didn't exist. With no suspect and no links to Barbara, investigators had little to go on. Her family refused to give up hope. Then, in 2000, a development came when the Oregon State Police Crime Lab was able to create a DNA profile from the preserved evidence. But when the profile was compared to the national database, there were no matches. The case stalled again. More than 2 decades later, in 2021, Parabon Nanolabs joined the investigation. The company uses DNA genealogy, comparing genetic information not only to criminal databases, but also to family trees. Cece Moore, Parabon's lead genealogist, said one detail stood out. The suspect's DNA strongly indicated red hair, the most certain result she had ever seen. That clue narrowed the search. Tracing family lines led Moore to Oregon, to a man named Robert Arthur Plimpton, then 56 years old, living in Troutdale. At the time of Barbara's death, Plimpton had been just 16. He had never been linked to Barbara, and his name had not come up during the original investigation. Detectives began quietly watching him. Eventually, they collected a piece of chewing gum he discarded. Testing showed the DNA was a match to the evidence from 1980. On June 8, 2021, police arrested Plimpton outside his home. He was charged with first-degree murder and several counts of second-degree murder. His trial began in 2024, overseen by Judge Amy Baggio. Prosecutors presented the DNA evidence and called witnesses from 1980, including one who claimed to see a man leading Barbara from the wooded area. Another recalled someone hiding in the bushes. Barbara's sisters, Alice Wan and Susan Pater, attended the trial after more than 40 years of waiting. The defense argued there were doubts. Witnesses had described a man closer to Barbara's height, around 6 feet, while Plimpton's records listed him at 5'9". They also argued her clothing had not been tested for DNA, which could have provided more context. The court also could not confirm whether the attack happened before or after her death, so those charges were not upheld. Still, on March 15, 2024, Judge Baggio ruled that the evidence proved Plimpton had fatally beaten Barbara. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and 4 counts of second-degree murder. He continues to claim innocence and plans to appeal. Barbara's family wept as the verdict was read. Alice said, "We're thrilled this was finally solved. Barbie was a special little girl, bright, bubbly, and caring." Susan added how hard it was knowing Plimpton had lived freely nearby for decades. Plimpton was sentenced in late 2024. He faces life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Barbara Tucker's case is now the oldest cold case solved in Gresham, Oregon, brought to an end by modern DNA genealogy and one discarded piece of gum. It was February 9, 1979, in Southern California. 17-year-old Esther Gonzalez left her parents' home in Beaumont and started walking to her sister's house in Banning. It was a short trip she had done many times before, but this time she never arrived. Esther was the 4th of 7 children. She was quiet, kind, and very close to her sister Elizabeth, who was just 1 year older. Since Esther didn't drive, she usually walked between family homes. That night, as she walked, someone was watching her. The next morning, February 10th, Riverside County Sheriff's deputies received a strange call. A man claimed he found a body on the side of Highway 243 near Banning, buried in snow. He gave little information and would not say whether the victim was male or female. Officers later described him as uncooperative. When deputies reached the area, they found Esther Gonzalez. She had been attacked and beaten before her body was left in the cold. There were no witnesses and no cameras. The only lead was the odd call from that unidentified man. Investigators worked for 5 days until they traced the caller. His name was Louis Randolph "Randy" Williamson, a Marine Corps veteran. His record showed no convictions for violent crimes, though there had been past accusations. In 1979, DNA testing was not available, so investigators had few tools. They asked Randy to take a polygraph test. He agreed and passed. That cleared him. Randy moved on with his life. Years later, he relocated to Florida, never facing charges for violent crimes. In 2014, he died of natural causes. For more than 4 decades, Esther's case went cold. Her family carried the pain and unanswered questions. In 2019, Riverside County formed a cold case unit. Esther's case stood out because investigators still had a biological sample recovered from her body. That sample had been entered into the National DNA Database years earlier, but no match was ever found. Now technology had advanced. Detectives sent the evidence to Othram Inc., a lab in Texas that specialized in forensic genealogy, a method that compares DNA with large family databases to trace possible relatives of a suspect. Analysts compared the evidence and began piecing it together. The results pointed back to Randy Williamson. In 1979, he had only been cleared by a polygraph test, not DNA. Since he had passed away in Florida, investigators turned to his autopsy. A blood sample from his 2014 autopsy was still preserved. Florida officials worked with California detectives to release it for testing. When the analysis came back, it was conclusive. Randy Williamson's DNA matched the sample taken from Esther's body in 1979. The same man who called the police, pretending to be a witness, was the one responsible. He had stood face to face with investigators, passed their test, and then lived the next 35 years without consequence. Whether Randy knew Esther or chose her at random is still unclear. Although there had been earlier allegations of assault in his past, none led to convictions, meaning his DNA was never entered into law enforcement databases. That allowed him to go undetected for decades. In 2024, Riverside County officials confirmed Williamson was the prime suspect. Esther's family was informed immediately. Elizabeth Gonzalez, now 64, told reporters that while the family felt relief, There was sadness knowing Williamson would never face trial. Her brother Eddie thanked detectives publicly, saying the family finally had closure. Investigators added that forensic genealogy is now one of the strongest tools for solving old cases, especially when traditional evidence runs out. They are also asking the public if anyone else may have been harmed by Williamson. Esther Gonzalez was 17 years old when her life was taken during a walk she thought was safe. It took 45 years for the truth to be uncovered. But through decades of waiting, one thing never changed. She was never forgotten.